Ioannis Papachristou, he was born in Athens in 1980 to families hailing from Eastern Thrace and the Marmara Island. He studied philosophy at the University of Patras and at the University of Athens and received his PhD in ancient philosophy from Humboldt University in Berlin. He has been a postdoctoral researcher with teaching duties at various universities, and currently he's working on the research program Sourcebook of Byzantine Philosophy at the University of Athens. He studies the history of the area of Propondis and published various articles on Marmara Islands. In 2015, he edited the Anagraphi της Kyzikou, a description of Kyzikos, 1825, a 19th century historical treatise on Artaki and the peninsula of Kyzikos. In 2019, he published the traveler's book, The Marble Island, Travels in Marmara Island. In 2019-20, he participated in the research projects, The Islands of Marmara, Documentation and Risk Assessments of Architectural Heritage, publishing a bilingual volume on the cultural heritage at risk of the Marmara Islands. He co-administrates the page Marmara Island, History and Genealogy in Facebook and runs the website periisis.gr, a page presenting his travels in Greece and Turkey. Welcome, Yanni, and we are ready and are looking forward to hearing what you have to present today.
Thank you very much, Gregory. Good evening from Istanbul. I should be able to share my screen now.
Correct.
And I would also like to thank you, before doing that, for giving me the opportunity to present today something on the less known Marmara Islands. So, you should be able to see now the first page, right?
We do.
Good. So the Marmara Islands are located in between the Straits of Hellespont and Bosporus at the southern Sea of Marmara or Propondis, the Sea of Rooms, as the traveler of the Ottoman court Evliya Çelebi called it in the 17th century, and form one of the two groups of islands in that sea, the other being the Princess Islands. The Marmara Islands are four: Marmara, the ancient Proconnesus, with 6 villages; Aloni, with 5 villages; Afisya, with 2 villages; and Koutali, with 1 settlement. In today's presentation, I would like to address the general question of what it means to be identified as an islander, then apply the theoretical framework to Marmara Islands by exploring in particular how genealogy constitutes the identity of their inhabitants. Finally, I will offer a list of sources for those who like to convey genealogical research for their Marmara ancestry. The term insularity has a double definition. First, it literally means being an island, and second, it means being isolated. In the course of archaeological and social studies, islands thought to be isolated societies, since the sea is a natural obstacle that limits them. According to many scholars, up to the beginning of our century, this type of isolation enables the evolution of specific social and cultural characteristics that are to be found only in the insular settlements we examine each time. However, I do not comply with this rather strict view. Recent scholarship have shown that the questions what is an island and what is insular identity is far more complicated. Archaeological evidence, local historiography, trade networks, sociological factors and politics from antiquity until today show that insularity can also be defined in terms of connectivity. What lies behind any definition of insularity, i.e., either as isolation or connectivity, is a trivial word for us, which for islanders is an entire universe, the sea. It is true to say that the sea is considered as an embodiment but also as a means of connecting. For instance, people living in mainland comprehend the sea as a limit, as an entrance to an unknown world. Yet, islanders comprehend the sea as a means of connection with other islands or mainland, as a source for nourishment, as their home. Living on an island practically means leaving the sea. Every island has met periods of isolation in its history. Let us not forget that many islands were used as places of exile or were the backwaters of political or commercial affairs. On the other hand, every island of the Mediterranean met migrations, colonialism, trading, shipping, and political interference. At the same time, all these factors or circumstances form an identity for each island. In fact, they form levels of identity. For instance, one may identify himself as an islander, then he could say he is a Marmarinos or a Koutalianos if he lives in Koutali. Due to the political state, he may identify himself as an Ottoman subject. Then, based on his profession and his social position, he could claim he is a fisherman, a sailor, a ship owner, or a marble worker. In terms of religion, he may say he is a Romnios, that is a Greek Orthodox. In cultural terms, he may be identified through his specific clothes. And of course, if his family immigrated from somewhere else, he may say that he comes from Epirus. So we can argue that the identity of islanders is multi-layered, based both on specific characteristics evolved in this or that particular island and the connectivity with other islands or places in mainland. Insular genealogy is both a result of all these factors and a factor of identity itself. I would dare to say that insular genealogy should be considered as one of the most important conditions to establish insularity as connectivity. In an attempt to present the whole picture, I would say that insular genealogy is formed by populations that have been on the island for centuries and create family connections in their villages and in between the other villages of the island. Then, if there is proximity to other islands or mainland, family connections are also created between islanders and between islanders and mainlanders. And finally, immigration towards the island and trading constantly enrich the genealogical lines with diverse identities. Thus, the outcome of insular genealogy is a fascinating blend of DNA and of cultural and social identities. Every insular society in the Mediterranean has the peculiarity of being open to constant human geographical changes. The closed basin of the Mediterranean, with its seas and the passages that lead to it, such as the Propontis, created multiple networks of communicating sea routes. These networks significantly determined the formation of insular societies. The four Marmara Islands are no exception. Their geographical position was a stop on the sea route from and to the Aegean through the Hellespont and from and to the Black Sea through the Bosporus. The uninterrupted trade of marble, the trade of wine, oil, silk, fish, and the maritime activity of the inhabitants of Marmara Islands composed over the centuries the rich human mosaic. The population of Marmara Islands from antiquity until today did not remain, ethnologically speaking, unaltered. For this reason, it is necessary to refer to specific episodes in the history of the islands that influenced the composition of their population. Ancient Proconnesus is mentioned by Strabo as a colony of Milesians, who must have arrived on the island around the 8th century BC and fortified Marmara and Aloni Islands. Historical facts described by Herodotus, Strabo, and Plutarch show that Proconnesus and Aloni played a strategic role in Propondis. Proconnesus, for instance, took part in the Delian Sea League in the 5th century BC. The alliance between Proconnesus and Athens is also confirmed by the fact that Athens helped Proconnesus during the attack of the ancient city of Cyzicus in 362 BC. The famous marble quarries of Marmara Island imply, even in our days, the arrival of foreign workers, i.e. non-islanders, many of whom settled permanently on Marmara. Based on historical sources of the ancient Greek, Roman, Byzantine, and Ottoman periods, it is concluded that people from different parts of the Mediterranean, the Aegean, the Black Sea, the Thracian Propodies, and Asia Minor settled on Marmara to work or live, fact that plays a role in the formation of the island's genealogy. During the Roman period and the early Byzantine centuries, the Marmara Islands were used as a place of exile and also attracted monastic activities, especially since the islands became the seat of a bishop. The islands belonged to Byzantine territory from the founding of the empire until the conquest of Constantinople by the Latins in 1204. At that time, the islands were occupied by the Latins under the supervision of the French Pierre de Brequel. It is certain that until 1261, when the Byzantine emperors in Nicaea recaptured Constantinople, the Latins settled on the islands, fortified some of the villages of Marmara and Aloni, and built castles. Over the centuries, many islanders had ancestors of Levantine origin, as evidenced by Latin names and nicknames. Shortly before or after the fall of Constantinople in 1453, the islands came under Ottoman rule. Ottoman authorities and Turkish families gradually settled mainly on Marmara Island. As a result, in the 16th century, Muslim workers came to work in the marble quarries. It is said, without written sources to confirm this, that several Christian inhabitants of the islands left and that some ended up in slave markets. Between the years 1462 and 1492, a commander of the Ottoman fleet, under whose jurisdiction were the islands of Propondis and Aegean, transferred Christian Albanians to Aloni and Marmara, who spoke the Arvanitika dialect, to increase the population of the islands. In the case of Marmara, Arvanitika-speaking Christians settled on Afthoni village, the eastern village of the island. Immigrants from Mytilene may have settled on Marmara the same period, since the cartographer Pirireis names Prastio village as Midilou on the map of the island he designed in 1511. The end of the 15th century also brings to Marmara Island expelled Sephardi Jews from Spain, with a possible stopover in Gallipoli and Redestos. The Sephardis created their own community on the island's capital over the years and were present up to the 1930s and 1940s. In the following centuries, migrations continued. Regarding the movements of Christian populations from the Peloponnese and elsewhere to Asia Minor, but also to the region of Propondis, it should be noted that these are usually forced movements. The Ottoman authorities applied the tactic to move populations, first in order to reinforce agricultural areas of Asia Minor with human resources, second They moved people to areas with a declining population after the fall of Constantinople or deserted areas after local battles. And sometimes they moved groups of people as prisoners for forced labor or to slave markets in the East. In this context, migrants and refugees from various parts of the Ottoman Empire, Albanians and Greeks from Epirus, Tsakones and Arvanites from the Peloponnese and the Aegean Islands, but also others from the Balkans, were transferred to the shores of Marmara Sea and the islands. Finally, it is affirmed that families from Mani, Epirus, Roumeli, Crete, Andros, Syros, and Chios moved during the Orlov Revolt in the 18th century, but also with the outbreak of the Greek Revolution in the years 1821-1826. In addition, the trade networks of marble, fish, olive oil, and wine from Afiskia, Koutali, Aloni, and Marmara, as well as the shipping evolution of the Greek Orthodox Marmarians, opened their society to the world, from Istanbul to Romania and Russia, to Trapezunda and back to the basin of Propondis, from Gallipoli, Mytilene, Limnos, Chios, and Smyrna, to Piraeus, Crete, Alexandria, Marseille, and the United States of America. This complicated but fascinating history of Marmara Islands, their interconnections and openness, are the background of the genealogical lines that formed the insular identity of the Rum Marmarians. Before passing to the final section of my presentation, I would like to conclude the section with the population numbers as they result from the Ottoman census of 1912, with some necessary additions I've made in green. I will not say anything about the numbers you will see. I will just show you the slides to have a picture about the population proportions in the Marmara Islands in the beginning of the 20th century.
Yeah, numbers speak for themselves, I think.
Exactly, yes. The conclusions are yours. I don't have to say anything. So, in this last section, I would like to offer a list as exhaustive as possible of the sources that one may use when researching Marmarian ancestry. To begin with, the sources are limited, as almost in any other Greek community of Asia Minor. However, a systematic research on the extant sources should give some results. In an attempt to categorize the sources we possess, I would say that there are 4 categories: institutional archives, private archives, newspapers, and databases. For each source, I will explain what one should expect to find. And I'll start with the institutional archives. Under this category fall sources of various statuses of accessibility. Some are accessible online, some are not. Almost all of them need Greek knowledge of Greek. So first, the General State Archives of Greece, the famous RAC. The Archive of Evaluation Committees of Refugees, to be found in Athens, includes the detailed fortune declarations made in 1923-1925 of the refugees from each village of Marmara Islands that were not farmers. The declarations sometimes include information about relatives of the refugees. The books also contain lists of the refugees that declared their fortune, even if some of them, in the meantime, immigrated outside Greece. The local offices of the GAC at Chalkida and Limni at Evi Island also possess codices of interest for Marmara Islands. Now, the Center for Asia Minor Studies. The Oral Tradition Archive contains interviews of refugees, also from the Marmara Islands, that were taken in the 1960s. The refugees describe their villages, their life, give a number of interesting information for the history and the topography of the islands, and the interviewed refugees also give some family information. The interviews are handwritten and in Greek. Third, the catalogue of farmer refugees made by the Greek state may be found online, and they contain alphabetically the names, surnames, and the father's or husband's name of refugees. Associations of Marmarians in Greece. Some of the associations, such as that at Nea Palatia in Attica, Neos Marmaras and Sarti in Chalkidiki, Kalamaria in Thessaloniki, Nea Koutali at Limnos, are in possession of archive material, such as books of the local councils of the islands that survived, Ottoman records, photographs, and books. Some of these associations also created museums that are very interesting, and I advise all Marmarians to visit at some point. Next, the Ottoman archives of the Turkish Republic. In Istanbul, they are located in Istanbul, and they contain a remarkable material about the Marmara Islands, which is accessible upon appointment. The only requirement is that one needs to have a good knowledge of Ottoman and modern Turkish language. The archives cover the period 16th to 20th centuries and contain, among other types of documents, population censuses, administrative documents, court documents, records about buildings, mainly churches, monasteries, schools, and the marble trading. The archives are digitized already, but one needs to have an appointment in order to get copies of the files he needs. Then, the Ecumenical Patriarchate in Istanbul. It contains church records, wedding, baptism, funeral certificates from neighborhoods in which many Marmarians were living in Istanbul, such as Balat, Fener, Pera, Tatavla, etc., and the patriarchal correspondence with the metropolis of Proconnesus, but both of them are rather difficult to access for different reasons. The Mount Athos collections in Chalkidiki. The libraries of some monasteries contain material related to Marmara Islands, especially of monasteries that may shed some light into genealogical research too. Most of this material is digitized and accessible nowadays. Now I pass to the private archives. Apart from private archives in the strict sense, in this category I include also some scattered material that are difficult to approach, such as archives stored in churches. Some private archives and documents end up in the aforementioned associations of Marmarians in Greece, but most of them are not digitized. Exception is the digitized archive of the Association of Nea Palatia in Attica that I pursued along with the director of the Historical and Paleographical Archive in Greece. A very important archive, that of Theophanis Theophanidis from Prastio in Marmara Island, passes to my hands by his son Spiros Theophanidis, and it currently is under digitization. The August project and George Topalidis that follows also managed to digitize the books of the Society of Athoni in Los Angeles, among other important items, and we are grateful to him because we were able to create a list of all the names included in the books of the Society and post it to our page on Facebook, Marmara Island History and Genealogy. In this category, I should mention the oldest church manuscript of the metropolis of Proconnesus. Yes, for some reason the slide didn't work out. Now I think it comes. Good. I have digitized the manuscript a decade ago. It contains acts from 1651 up to 1833, mainly related to Aloni Island, the ancient seat of the metropolis, and other ecclesiastical matters. The transcription of the manuscript is almost ready, and I prepare an edition that I will try to publish in the near future. Newspapers. Newspapers created by refugees in Greece are a valuable source for research. Marmarians had two newspapers published from 1938 up to the 1970s, the Pampropkonisiakon Vima before World War II, and its sequel, the Marmarina Nea, after the war. The Pampropkonisiakon Vima is digitized in the collections of the Library of the Greek Parliament, and it is accessible online. And the Marmarina Nea is partly digitized by the Library of Sismanoglio Megaro of the General Consulate of Greece in Istanbul, accessible online too. And I have digitized a big part of it from the collection of Theophanis Theophanidis as well. The newspaper Mikrasiatiki, published in Chalkida, Evia, is also of importance for Marmarians, but difficult to find since it can only be found in private collections. So most of us today are familiar with various databases like the Ellis Island, the Family Search, and other records in the United States, in Canada, and in Europe that are public. The companies MyHeritage, Ancestry, and Greek Ancestry, of course, also provide access to numerous documents that are useful to Marmarians across the world. And I should say, and I'll stop here, in MyHeritage, we also created until today, mainly with the efforts of the extinguished researcher of Marmarian genealogy, Vasiliki Babatsikos, family trees that contain more than 7,000 persons hailing from Marmara Islands. And before leaving you, I would like to close with a sentence that marked me, said by a great teacher, paleographer, and archivist in Greece, Agamemnon Tselikas, who happens to be my teacher as well. He told me, if you want to do history, start with the history of your family. And it is to this sentence that I owe my presence in front of you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yannis. Well, amazing. Great presentation. Thank you so much.